My parents banned me from dating until 28 after my sister's abusive ex. Yesterday, we got married in secret. They're about to find out, and I'll lose everything. Look, I need to tell you something that's been eating me alive. This morning, I stood in a courthouse and became someone's wife. And my parents. They have absolutely no idea I've even been on a date. Ever. I'm 24 years old, and for the last 3 years, I've been living this bizarre double life that would make a spy jealous. But before you judge me, you need to understand why my parents made the rule in the first place. Because, honestly, if I were them, I might have done the same thing. My sister Emma is 4 years older than me. When she was 24, she met a guy named Derek at a coffee shop downtown. He seemed perfect at first. Charming, attentive, always knew exactly what to say. My parents loved him. I was 20 at the time, still figuring out college, and I remember thinking Emma had won the lottery with this guy. That lasted about 6 months. Then things started changing. Slowly at first. Derek didn't like Emma's friends, said they were bad influences. He convinced her to quit her book club because it was taking time away from them. He'd call constantly when she was out, just to check in. My parents noticed, but Emma kept saying they didn't understand, that Derek just loved her so much. By year 2, Emma had isolated herself from everyone except our family. And even with us, Derek was always there, always watching, always subtly controlling the conversation. He had convinced her she was terrible with money, so he took over her bank accounts. He told her she was gaining weight, so he started controlling what she ate. He made her believe she was lucky he stayed with her at all. The worst part. We all saw it happening, but Emma couldn't. Or wouldn't. Every time my parents tried to talk to her about it, she'd defend him. They tried ultimatums, they tried gentle conversations, they tried interventions. Nothing worked. Derek had his hooks in deep. Then came year 4. Emma finally decided she wanted out. She'd been secretly saving money from her job, hiding it in an account Derek didn't know about. She planned to leave while he was at work one Thursday afternoon. She had her bags packed, she had a friend waiting in a car outside. Derek came home early. I'll never forget the phone call. My mom's voice, completely shattered, telling me Emma was in the hospital. Derek had put her there. Fractured skull, broken ribs, internal bleeding. The doctors said if the neighbors hadn't called 911 when they heard the screaming, Emma might not have made it. That was 2 years ago. Derek got 10 years, but with good behavior and overcrowding, he could be out in 5. Emma survived, but she's not the same person she was before she met him. She's stronger in some ways, more cautious in others. She goes to therapy twice a week. She still flinches sometimes when someone moves too quickly. And my parents. They broke. Not visibly, not in a way most people would notice. But something fundamental inside them shattered when they saw their daughter in that hospital bed. They'd failed to protect her, at least that's how they saw it. They'd watched the warning signs for 4 years and couldn't save her. So when Emma was released from the hospital, about a month into her recovery, my parents sat me down for a family meeting. I was 22 at the time, finishing up my pre-med studies. My mom's hands were shaking as she poured tea. My dad couldn't look at me directly. They told me they'd made a decision. A rule, really. I wasn't allowed to date until I turned 28. No relationships, no romantic entanglements, nothing. If I broke this rule, they'd cut off all financial support. No help with medical school, no safety net, nothing. I'd be completely on my own. 6 years. They wanted me to focus on school, on building my career, on becoming stable enough that I couldn't fall into the same trap Emma had. I understood their reasoning. Honestly, I did. They were terrified of losing another daughter. Emma had been 24 when she met Derek, the same age I am now. In their minds, if they could just get me past that vulnerable age, past the age where Emma had made her mistake, I'd be safe. But here's the thing they didn't know. The thing nobody knew except my roommate Jess. I'd already met someone. His name is Ethan. We met 7 months before my parents implemented their rule. We were lab partners in organic chemistry, probably the most soul-crushing class in the pre-med curriculum. Most people in that class looked like they were attending their own funeral. But Ethan? He made chemistry fun. He'd explain molecular structures by comparing them to characters from fantasy novels. He'd say things like, "This benzene ring is basically the Fellowship of the Ring, but with carbon atoms, and somehow it would actually help me understand." We started studying together outside of class. Coffee shops at first, then the library, then eventually his apartment because it was closer to campus. We'd spend hours going over problems, and then hours more just talking about everything else. His dreams of being a software engineer, my medical school ambitions, our families, our fears, what we wanted from life. I fell in love with him somewhere between failed titrations and successful syntheses. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet and certain, like realizing you've been walking towards something your whole life without knowing it. We'd been dating for 3 months when my parents dropped their rule. 3 months of actual dating, but months before that of slowly falling for each other. And suddenly, I was supposed to end it. Walk away from the one person who made organic chemistry bearable, who made me laugh during the hardest semester of my life. I went to Ethan's apartment that night and just sobbed. I explained everything. Emma, Derek, the hospital, my parents' new rule, the fact that I couldn't afford medical school without their help. I told him we had to break up, that I couldn't risk my entire future for a relationship that might not even work out. And Ethan, bless him, he just held me. When I finally stopped crying, he said, "What if we don't break up? What if we just get really good at being careful?" I looked at him like he was insane. "Ethan," they said, 6 years. We can't hide a relationship for 6 years. "Maybe not," he said. "But we can try. And if we make it, we'll know we're solid. If we don't, at least we gave it a shot." So that's what we did. We became invisible. Or rather, we hid in plain sight. To my parents, Ethan was my study partner. Just a friend from school who happened to live near campus and was really good at chemistry. When I needed to stay late studying, Ethan was the reason. When I missed family dinners, it was because Ethan and I were working on a group project. We studied at coffee shops, sitting across from each other with textbooks open, holding hands under the table where no one could see. We had anniversaries in his apartment with takeout and quiet music, and I always made sure to leave early enough to keep my cover story straight. My roommate Jess was our guardian angel. She covered for me constantly, giving my parents updates about our girls' nights while I was actually curled up on Ethan's couch watching medical dramas and laughing at their terrible depictions of hospital procedures. But Emma knew. She figured it out about 10 months in. She came to visit me at school and noticed how Ethan and I looked at each other in the campus center. It's hard to hide that kind of connection when you're in the same room. She pulled me aside later and asked me point blank if we were together. I couldn't lie to her. Not to Emma, not after everything she'd been through. I expected her to be angry, or to tell our parents. Instead, she hugged me tight and said she was glad I'd found someone who made me smile like that. But she made me promise something. She made me swear that I'd be careful, that I'd listen if anyone told me they saw red flags in Ethan, because she hadn't listened and it had almost killed her. I promised. And Emma became our secret keeper. The only family member who knew the truth. She'd cover for me when I needed alibis, send warning texts if our parents were asking too many questions about my social life. She told me once that watching Ethan and me gave her hope that healthy love existed, that not every relationship ended with broken bones and restraining orders. For 3 years, we pulled it off. 3 years of stolen moments and careful lies. 3 years of wearing my emotions like a mask whenever I was around my parents. 3 years of pretending Ethan was just a friend while he was actually the most important person in my life. And then, 7 months ago, everything changed. Ethan and I went hiking up to this waterfall he'd been promising to show me for months. It was a gorgeous day, early spring, everything green and alive. We reached the top and I was catching my breath, admiring the view, when I turned around and Ethan was down on one knee. He had a ring. A simple silver band with a small sapphire, something I could hide if I needed to. He told me he knew we couldn't tell anyone, that we couldn't get married until my parents' arbitrary deadline passed. But he wanted me to know he was ready to wait as long as it took. That I was worth waiting for. I said yes while crying so hard I could barely see the ring. I wore it on a chain under my shirt, hidden where my parents would never see it. We started calling each other fiancé in private, while maintaining the study buddy fiction in public. We promised ourselves we'd make it official when I turned 28. 4 more years. We could do 4 more years. Then Emma got sick. She'd been having headaches for weeks. Persistent, painful, getting worse. After multiple doctor visits and a bunch of tests, they found a brain tumor. Golf ball sized, pressing against her frontal lobe. The neurosurgeon said it was most likely benign, but it needed to come out immediately to prevent permanent damage. My parents were devastated. They'd just gotten Emma back after losing her to Derek's control, and now they might lose her forever to something growing inside her head. The surgery was scheduled 9 weeks out, and those 9 weeks felt like an eternity. I spent every evening at the hospital with them during Emma's pre-surgery appointments. The night after a particularly difficult consultation, Emma pulled me into the hallway alone. She told me she'd updated her will, just in case. And one of her wishes was that if something happened to her during surgery, she wanted me to stop hiding and start living my life. She wanted me to marry Ethan and be happy instead of waiting for some arbitrary deadline our traumatized parents had set. I told her nothing was going to happen. The surgeon said there was a 95% success rate. But she gripped my hand hard and made me promise anyway. She said she'd spent 4 years of her life trapped with someone who made her miserable, and she wasn't going to let me spend another 4 years hiding someone who made me happy. I promised, even though the thought of her not making it made me feel physically sick. The surgery was scheduled for a Monday morning in November. 7-hour procedure, then recovery before we could see her. My parents practically moved into the hospital waiting room. Ethan came with me, sat in the corner pretending to study but really just being there for support. When the surgeon finally came out after 8 hours instead of 7, we all jumped up so fast we nearly knocked over chairs. The tumor had been more complicated than the scans showed, wrapped around blood vessels in ways that made removal tricky. But they'd gotten everything. Emma was stable. She woke up confused and nauseous, but she woke up. Over the next 2 weeks, she healed faster than expected. The pathology came back benign, and the surgeon said she wouldn't need radiation or chemo, just monitoring to make sure nothing grew back. My parents cried with relief. Emma, though, she had other thoughts. The night before her discharge, she asked to talk to me privately. I thought she wanted to discuss post-surgery care or something practical. Instead, she asked if I remembered my promise. I said of course I did, but she was okay now, so there was no need to rush anything. She shook her head. She said going through this had taught her that life was too short and too unpredictable to waste time waiting for perfect conditions. She told me to marry Ethan now, not in 4 years. She'd help me figure out how to tell our parents afterward. I went home that night and told Ethan what Emma said. We talked until 3 in the morning about whether we were brave enough to actually do it. We'd been playing it safe for so long that the idea of defying my parents felt terrifying. But we couldn't deny that Emma was right. We'd already wasted 3 years hiding. 4 more years felt like forever when we were already sure about each other. Ethan said he'd marry me if I was ready to risk my parents' reaction. I said let's do it next month. Give ourselves time to plan something small and figure out how to break the news. We decided on a courthouse ceremony. Just a few close friends. Nothing fancy, just legal and real and ours. We picked January 16th, exactly 9 weeks away. During winter break, Jess helped me shop for a dress. Something simple and cream-colored that I could wear again so it wouldn't look suspicious hanging in my closet. Ethan's best friend Marcus agreed to be our witness. Emma promised to show up even if it meant skipping a follow-up appointment. We didn't send invitations or book a venue. We just needed the marriage license, 2 witnesses, and an officiant for a 5-minute ceremony at the courthouse downtown. It felt like the biggest decision of my life while also being too simple to be real. Jess asked if I was scared about my parents cutting me off financially, and I was terrified. Medical school was expensive. I'd already taken out loans to cover some tuition. Losing their support would mean more debt, possibly having to take time off to work, delaying graduation. But Ethan had been preparing for this. He'd graduated with his engineering degree and was working at a tech company downtown. He'd been saving money, specifically for the possibility that we'd have to support ourselves if my parents reacted badly. He showed me his bank account one night to prove he was serious. He'd planned out our budget, assuming I'd lose all parental support. And while it would be tight, it was doable. I cried when I saw those spreadsheets. Because they represented 3 years of him planning for our future, while most people our age were still figuring out what to have for dinner. The hardest part was lying to my parents every day leading up to the wedding. They'd call to check in, ask about my classes, and I'd tell them everything was fine while hiding my engagement ring under my shirt. My mom would talk about Emma's recovery and how glad she was that our family was finally healing. And I was completely blind to the fact that I was about to shatter their peace. The guilt was constant. I knew what I was doing would hurt them, even though I believed it was right. Emma kept telling me the guilt would disappear once I was married and happy. That our parents' fears didn't get to control my entire life. She'd been through hell with Derek and survived, and she believed my healthy relationship with Ethan deserved to be out in the open instead of hidden away. Then, 4 weeks before the wedding, Derek was released from prison. Emma got a notification from the Victim Services Coordinator. She called me immediately, her voice shaking so badly I couldn't understand her at first. He'd only served 4 years of his 10-year sentence due to overcrowding and good behavior. Now he was out with an ankle monitor and a restraining order. Emma dismissed the restraining order as just paperwork. My parents went into full protective mode again. New locks, security cameras, basically putting Emma under house arrest for her own safety. The restraining order said Derek couldn't get within 500 feet of her, but they didn't trust it. They'd trusted the justice system before and it had failed her. This obviously made my situation more complicated. My parents were now hyper-focused on anything that might harm their daughters. I considered postponing the wedding, but Emma said no. She said Derek's release was exactly why I needed to go through with it. To show that his actions didn't give him permanent power over our entire family. She said my relationship with Ethan had nothing to do with her experience with Derek, and conflating the two was exactly the problem with our parents' blanket ban on dating. Not all men were Derek. Not all relationships ended in violence. I deserved my own story separate from hers. She promised she'd be at the courthouse on January 16th, even if our parents had her on lockdown. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep at all. I lay in my dorm room staring at the ceiling while Jess slept peacefully in the next bed. I ran through every possible scenario. Best case, my parents were hurt but eventually came around. Worst case, they cut me off completely and I didn't see them for years. The morning of January 16th dawned cold and bright. I woke up at 6 even though the ceremony wasn't until 11. Jess made me eat breakfast even though my stomach was in knots. She helped me get ready like we were going into battle. I put on the cream dress, simple makeup, and the ring that had been hidden under my shirt for 7 months. Jess took pictures of me in our dorm room. When my future kids ask about my wedding day, these are the photos I'll show them. Ethan texted at 9:30 saying he was already at the courthouse with Marcus, that the officiant would be ready whenever we arrived. I told Jess it was time, and we walked out into the cold January air toward downtown. My phone rang when we were 3 blocks away. I almost dropped it when I saw it was my mom calling. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't answer. Jess grabbed my arm to steady me. I finally picked up. My mom's voice was tight with barely contained panic. She asked where I was because she'd called my dorm room and I hadn't answered. I said I was grabbing coffee with Jess before my afternoon class. Which was a lie because it was only 10 in the morning and I didn't have class on Thursdays. She said she needed me to come home immediately. Something had happened with Emma. My heart stopped. I asked if Emma was okay, if Derek had violated the restraining order, if she was hurt. My mom said Emma was physically fine, but she'd left the house this morning without telling anyone where she was going. And with Derek on parole, they were terrified something had happened to her. They'd been calling for 3 hours and she wasn't answering. I felt sick because I knew exactly where Emma was. She was already at the courthouse waiting for me. And now our parents were losing their minds thinking Derek had taken her. I told my mom I'd try calling Emma too and let her know if I got through. Then I hung up before she could ask more questions. Jess looked at me and asked what we were doing. I said we were still going to the courthouse because Emma was clearly determined to be there, even if it meant our parents panicked. I called Emma to see if she'd seen Mom's calls. She answered immediately and said yes, but she'd silenced her phone because today was about me and she wasn't going to miss it. She said she'd text Mom after the ceremony to say she was at a friend's house and lost track of time. I felt terrible that my wedding was causing this chaos, but we were 4 blocks from the courthouse now. Ethan was waiting. Turning back felt impossible. Jess told me we could still postpone if I wanted. But I shook my head and kept walking. The courthouse was an old building with marble floors and high ceilings that made every sound echo. Ethan was standing in the entrance wearing a black suit I'd never seen before. When he saw me, his whole face lit up, and suddenly all the complications felt worth it. Marcus was there with a camera, ready to document everything. Emma appeared from around a corner wearing a blue dress and a huge smile despite the chaos she'd caused at home. She hugged me tight and whispered how proud she was of me for going through with this. The officiant was a friendly-looking woman in her 50s. She led us to a small room on the 3rd floor where weddings took place. The whole space felt surreal. This tiny room with fluorescent lighting was where people made lifetime vows between lunch breaks and parking ticket payments. The officiant asked if we were ready. Noah took my hand, and suddenly we were saying vows we'd written on notebook paper at 2 in the morning. Ethan promised to support my ambitions even if they meant years of medical school stress and sleepless residency shifts. He promised to be patient with my complicated family and never make me choose between him and them if it could be avoided. I promised to trust him completely and never let my parents' fears make me doubt what we'd built together. I promised to communicate instead of hide when things got difficult, because we were done keeping secrets after today. The officiant pronounced us married. Ethan kissed me. Emma, Jess, and Marcus cheered quietly and respectfully in the courthouse. Marcus took photos of us signing the marriage certificate. It became official and irreversible. I was married at 24 to someone my parents had no idea I was dating. And in a few hours, I'd have to tell them and face whatever came next. We went to a small Italian restaurant nearby for a celebration lunch. 5 people in a corner booth, eating pasta and toasting with water glasses because none of us were old enough to legally order alcohol. Emma's phone kept buzzing with calls from our parents. She finally excused herself to call Mom back with her rehearsed story about being at a friend's house working on a project. I could hear her from across the restaurant, apologetic but firm. When she came back, she said Mom was upset but relieved she was safe. She'd agreed to be home in an hour, so our wedding lunch had a time limit. We ate quickly and took more photos outside the restaurant, trying to capture this bizarre, wonderful, terrifying day. Ethan pulled me close and asked if I was okay. I honestly didn't know. I was happy, married, and terrified about what would happen when I told my parents. Emma pulled me aside before we separated. She said I didn't have to tell them today if I wasn't ready. Maybe wait a week or a month until the Derek situation calmed down. But I shook my head. I said keeping this secret for one more day felt impossible now that it was real. I wanted to be able to call Ethan my husband instead of my study partner. I wanted to wear my ring where everyone could see it. I was done hiding, no matter how severe the consequences. Emma hugged me and promised to be there when I told them. She was going to try to intervene, explain why this was different from her situation with Derek. She'd let them know that she'd been carefully watching our relationship for 3 years and seen zero warning signs. I thanked her and watched her walk to the bus stop. The sister who'd been through hell and was still fighting for my happiness. Jess went back to campus while Ethan and I went to his apartment. We sat on the couch in stunned silence, holding hands and staring at our matching rings. We were legally married. The reality of it hit me all at once and I burst into tears. Not from sadness, but from how overwhelming everything was. Ethan pulled me close and promised that no matter how my parents reacted, we'd figure it out together. I wanted to believe him, but I also knew my parents' financial support wasn't just tuition. It was housing during summer breaks, health insurance, a safety net if something went wrong. Losing it felt catastrophic. I asked Ethan if he ever regretted choosing someone with such complicated family baggage. He said no. That my family's trauma didn't define our relationship, and he knew what he was getting into. That evening, I decided to tell my parents as quickly as possible. Like ripping off a bandage. I called my mom around 6 and asked if I could come over to discuss something important. She immediately asked if I was pregnant or in danger. I said no, just something I needed to talk about in person. She said my dad would be home by 7 and I should come for dinner. I met Ethan in his car and we drove to my parents' house in silence. Both of us bracing for the worst. I told him to wait in the car while I broke the news, but he refused. He said now that we were married, we faced things together. We pulled up to my childhood home and sat in the driveway for 5 minutes, building courage before walking to the front door. My mom opened the door before I could knock. Her face brightened when she saw me, then fell when she noticed Ethan behind me. She asked who he was. I said he was my study partner from school who'd driven me because my car was having problems. Another lie, but my last one, because everything would be real in about 10 minutes. We went inside. My dad was setting the table and did the same double take when he saw Ethan. My parents had never met him despite our 3-year relationship because our cover story only worked if they never saw us together. Emma was already sitting at the counter. She gave me an encouraging nod. My mom asked if Ethan wanted to stay for dinner. I said yes, that I needed to tell them something and he was involved. We all sat down at the dining room table eating lasagna my mom had made. The normalcy of it felt bizarre given what I was about to say. My dad asked how school was going. I said good, then took a deep breath and told them I had something to confess that I'd been hiding. My mom's face went rigid immediately. She looked at Emma like she thought this was about Derek. I assured them it had nothing to do with Emma or Derek or anything dangerous. But they weren't pleased. I pulled the chain from under my shirt and showed them the ring I'd been hiding for 7 months. Both of my parents stared at it in confusion. I said that Ethan and I had been dating for 3 years. That we'd met before they implemented the no-dating rule and had continued seeing each other in secret because I couldn't give up either him or their support for medical school. The silence that followed was deafening. My dad asked if I was joking. I said no, I was completely serious. My mom looked at Ethan like he was a stranger who'd broken into her home. Which, in a way, he was. She asked how I could be so selfish and reckless after everything they'd been through with Emma. I felt my face get hot with shame and anger. I said that while I understood their concern, Ethan wasn't Derek. Lumping all men together because of one terrible person was unfair and unhealthy. Emma stepped forward. She said she'd known about the relationship for 3 years and had been watching for any warning signs. Ethan had treated me with nothing but respect and kindness the entire time. My dad jumped up from the table so fast his chair nearly tipped over. He said I'd betrayed their trust, violated the one rule they'd made to keep me safe, and there would be consequences. I told them I understood the consequences. But they needed to understand something first. I pulled out my phone and showed them pictures from the last 3 years. Ethan and me studying at coffee shops. Him helping me move into my dorm. Us volunteering together at the downtown free clinic. Some of them Emma had secretly taken, documenting a relationship my parents had no idea existed. I showed them texts from Ethan. him checking on me during midterms, bringing me food when I was too stressed to eat, staying up late to help me study for the MCAT. I showed them the spreadsheet he'd made calculating how we'd survive if they cut me off financially. My mom was crying now. I couldn't tell if it was anger or something else. Then I said the thing that would change everything. I told them Ethan and I had gotten married at the courthouse this morning. Emma had been there as our witness. I understood if they never wanted to speak to me again, but I wasn't going to apologize for choosing happiness. The explosion I expected didn't come immediately. Instead, my dad sat back down and put his head in his hands. My mom stared at the table for a solid 2 minutes without saying anything. Emma reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. Finally, my dad looked up and asked Ethan directly if he knew what he'd signed up for, marrying into such a broken and difficult family. Ethan met his eyes and said yes. He said he'd watched me support Emma through her recovery and deal with the aftermath of trauma. He knew how much I loved my family despite the difficult circumstances. He didn't want to take me away from them. He wanted to be part of helping us all heal. My mom asked why we couldn't have waited 4 more years like they'd asked. I said 4 years was arbitrary and based on fear rather than any real assessment of Ethan's character. Emma told them about her brain tumor. About the promise she'd made me make to not waste my life waiting for perfect conditions that might never come. She said watching Derek nearly destroy her had taught her that life was too short and too unpredictable to postpone happiness. She'd encouraged me to marry Ethan now instead of hiding for 4 more years. My mother started crying harder. I realized she wasn't angry anymore, just overwhelmed and scared and grieving the loss of control over a situation she'd tried to prevent. My father asked what we expected from them now. If we thought they'd just accept this and keep paying for medical school like nothing had changed. I said honestly, I didn't know what to expect. But I hoped they could at least try to get to know Ethan before deciding he was dangerous just because he existed. We sat there for another hour talking through everything. The conversation slowly shifted from accusations to questions. My parents asked Ethan about his job, his family, his plans for the future. They asked how we'd managed to hide a relationship for 3 years. I explained the study partner cover and Jess's constant alibis. They asked if Ethan had ever pressured me or shown controlling behavior. Both Emma and I said no. That actually, I'd been the one pushing to move faster while Ethan wanted to wait and do things right. My mom asked to see the wedding photos. When she saw pictures of me in my cream dress signing the marriage certificate, she burst into tears again. She said I looked happy, which was both wonderful and heartbreaking for her. By the time we left that night, nothing was resolved, but we were still talking. My dad said he wasn't ready to give his blessing, but he wouldn't cut me off completely. We'd figure out the financial details later. My mom hugged me goodbye and whispered that she was trying to understand. I whispered back that I knew this was hard and I was sorry for the secrecy. Ethan shook both their hands and promised to take care of me. It felt strangely traditional, given the circumstances. We drove back to his apartment in silence, both emotionally exhausted. That night, lying in bed next to my husband, I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. Relief that the secret was finally out. Guilt because the truth had hurt my parents so deeply. The following months were complicated. My parents agreed to meet with Ethan and me once a week for dinner, gradually getting to know him and learning to trust him. Emma became our biggest advocate, constantly pointing out the differences between Ethan's respectful behavior and Derek's manipulation. My mom started therapy to process her trauma from Emma's relationship. She admitted one night that she'd been trying to prevent the wrong thing. She couldn't prevent me from being hurt, only from living. My dad took longer to come around. But I'd catch him laughing at Ethan's jokes or asking his advice on tech problems at work. 7 months after the courthouse ceremony, we had a small reception in my parents' backyard with extended family who had no idea I'd been dating anyone. My mom cried the entire time, but they were happy tears. That fall, I applied to medical school. Ethan sat with me through every essay and interview prep session. I got accepted to 3 programs. We chose the one closest to both our families because maintaining those relationships mattered to both of us. My parents helped with tuition, as promised. My dad admitted he was impressed with how seriously Ethan took supporting my career. Emma started dating again for the first time since Derek. Someone kind and patient who understood her trauma and never pushed her boundaries. She told me that watching my relationship with Ethan gave her hope that healthy love existed. Derek violated his parole 9 months after his release and went back to prison for another 5 years. It gave us all some breathing room. Looking back, I don't regret getting married at 24. It was harder than waiting would have been. It caused pain and conflict that could have been avoided. But it also forced necessary conversations about fear, control, and healing that our family needed to have. Emma says my rebellion gave her permission to start living again instead of letting Derek's abuse define her forever. She's now planning her own wedding to her kind, patient boyfriend, and my parents are genuinely happy for her instead of terrified. Ethan surprised me with a proper honeymoon on our first anniversary. We went to this small beach town where we could finally be publicly married without worrying who might see us. We walked on the beach wearing our rings in full view. After years of hiding, the freedom felt incredible. My parents sent us a card on our anniversary. My mom wrote that she was proud of me for fighting for my happiness even when it scared her, and that she was grateful I'd found someone who treated me with the respect I deserved. My dad added that Ethan had proven himself to be exactly the kind of partner they'd hoped I'd find someday. Just sooner than they'd expected. It's surreal telling this story now because I remember how terrified I was that morning of the wedding. How certain I was that my parents would never forgive me. The reality turned out more complicated than I'd imagined, but also more hopeful. They didn't forgive me right away, but they also didn't abandon me. They struggled, asked questions, and gradually learned to trust again. My parents had been so focused on preventing future pain that they'd forgotten people need permission to pursue joy. Getting married at 24 wasn't foolish or selfish like my dad first said. It was simply a decision to start my life rather than wait for someone else's timeline to allow it. And you know what? I'd make the same choice again.